أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have you, O Prophet, thought that the people of the cave and the plaque were the only wonders of our signs? Remember when those youths took refuge in the cave and said, our Lord, grant us mercy from yourself and guide us rightly through our ordeal. Assalamu alaikum, ya shabab. Welcome to another edition of Islam for Europeans. And I wanted to make this video actually about born Muslim youth and make it a special video specifically to support them, specifically those Muslim youth who are living in the West. Some of them go to public schools, to Catholic schools, to Islamic schools. And I know that on this channel, we have a tendency to kind of over-focus our issues on converts, you know, in particular European descendant converts. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we don't care about, you know, the rest of the Muslim community. You know, in fact, you know, we make these videos and focus on, you know, what we know, you know, because if you have a strong community of converts from whatever population, it's going to reap enormous benefits for the whole ummah, right? But we want to have good relations with Muslims from other, you know, groups and populations. You know, even though we, you know, as Euro converts, haven't lived through the same experience, exact same experiences as they have, right? You know, also, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions about, you know, what we're about. We want to reiterate that I4E is not a hate group or an exclusivist group. We're against the denigration of any group of people or culture. You know, I've always been a vocal supporter of born Muslims, and you know, whether that's them going back to their traditional cultures in some way, whether that's through clothing or through their cuisine. You know, whether that's, you know, Pakistani sisters wearing an Islamic version of the Saudi or nose ring, or Palestinian youth wearing the kufaya. Any of those things culturally that are in a halal way are good. And, you know, it serves as like a bulwark against the global monoculture. And, you know, we're going to talk into and get into at least some of the struggles that I've seen, that, you know, the great friendships that I've made with a lot of, you know, Muslim youth, you know, in my 20 years of being a Muslim, you know. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that, you know, I do want to say though that when I first converted to Islam as a 22-year-old former Catholic, always it was the Muslim youth who were the ones who were willing to reach out to me and talk to me, see how I was doing, to help me learn my religion. You know, one of the Muslim youth, when I first converted, he taught me how to pray. And, you know, I established a lot of really good, meaningful friendships with many of them. And I think part of that is because, you know, them, you know, being born and raised in the West, they really understood Western culture, um, you know, better than their parents to a degree. You know, so you know, they understood the lingo. Many of them were well integrated into the greater Canadian community. They were confident, you know, and for the most part, they never let the haters get under their skin, right? So, and these were kids that, you know, usually hung around the mosque. So I had, you know, they also had pretty good relations with their non-Muslim classmates. Even though, you know, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of, you know, decadent media, you know, anti-Islamic, degenerate culture that, you know, were bad influences, you know, for the most part on white Canadians in the Anglosphere. You know, but as converts, you know, we were always also, you know, as converts, you know, we were influenced by our elders and our peers that, you know, drinking tons of alcohol and doing drugs is normal and necessary to have a good time. You know, there were no limits on, you know, what people wore. And when you're growing up as a young adult, that's really a minefield to navigate through. And like alhamdulillah, it's great that these Muslim youth, that they have Islam, but it's still an enormous pressure for them. And to an extent, I can understand, but not fully understand, because I kind of went through the same thing. If you're a guy, there's always pressure to be incredibly physically strong, to be someone that can overpower people. If you're a girl, teenage girls, I was growing up, there's a lot of pressure on them to wear makeup, to be attractive to boys. So I mean, like the Muslim youth, I mean, they're facing those pressures as well, right? For them, it may not be on the family level, but definitely there's a pressure there, to try to conform to like, the greater Western culture. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give them the guidance and the strength to be able to navigate, through years as teenagers and beyond, right? So, but I wanted to make this video, to born Muslim youth living in the West, because you guys and girls are going to be the future basically of the Muslim community, and honestly, because you're so young, there's a real opportunity to build bridges, between young Muslims and young Westerners. I think because I think what I've seen is that the older generation of like, kind of like boomers, the whole boomer generation, even Gen X to a extent, I guess they're more likely to have the kind of negative attitudes towards Islam or Muslims in general, or maybe things like the Palestinian cause, more so than whites who come from like later Gen X and even Gen Z. Like you could tell that there's definitely the tide is turning in terms of there's a lot of people and Westerners who really have a positive opinion of Islam, because we stand firm in our beliefs, and we actually stand up, and agree with them, and Andrew Tate is like, I guess, an example, even though he's a very controversial figure, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but he's an example of someone who's a Westerner who looks at the decadence of Western culture and sees Islam as as a religion, as a way of life, that gives you meaning to your life, right? So, and this also goes likewise for young Muslims. I noticed that they've seen their parents, to an extent, it's understandable, have a lot of fear and resentment and anger towards the Anglosphere and vice versa, right? So, but them seeing that and looking at growing up in the younger years where they understand better, like social media and the different schisms within the right, that there is a faction of the right that actually has a lot of positive attitudes towards Islam. I think the youth are more in tune with that, as opposed to I guess kind of these Muslim influencers that are in like their 30s and 40s, right? You see a lot of young Muslims using like the Chad memes, the Pepe memes in an Islamic in an Islamic way, and vice versa. You see a lot of like like kind of like white teenagers who are more on the conservative side, who have a lot of respect for Islam and actually learn like a lot of Islamic terminology as well. Again, it doesn't mean you're not going to find haters on either side, but I do see that Muslim youth, there's a great opportunity for them to forge these better relationships with their classmates, because that's going to have like a ripple effect as they become the older generation, right? It kind of reminds me of the timing of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his companions when they made hijrah to Medina. And as we know, there were two major tribes, you had the Aus and the Khazraj, and their parents and their ancestors from those two tribes were absolutely decimated by war. They absolutely despised each other. They were mortal enemies for a long time. And this battle, it resulted in a lot of mutual deaths of the elders of the Aus and the Khazraj on the battlefield. And this happened prior to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu hijrah to Medina. So you had these two tribes that were decimated. It was almost like the youth, they saw this bloodshed. They saw that this warring between the two tribes was going to lead to their destruction as an entire city. And they wanted something new. They wanted something different. And I think that's part of the reason why Islam appealed to these two tribes so much, because, they were all united in the worship of, the one God, Allah. And, the generations of mutual hatred by joining this religion would quickly come to an end, alhamdulillah. So obviously, we compare that to 2023, it's not exactly the same thing, but I do see kind of some similarities with that. I do see that, there's a vast range of thoughts regarding converts. There's a vast range of thoughts about how they feel about, the white population, other non-Muslim populations. Those opinions range from highly negative to highly positive and everywhere in between, right? So I'm not here to judge or tell Muslims how to think and feel. I don't want to sound woke when I say this, because I am not a visible minority Muslim. I didn't grow up in a high school as a Muslim or a visible minority Muslim. So, and also on top of that, I don't have a Muslim family, and there's issues that, Muslim youth are facing even with their Muslim family, so, those are things we want to keep in mind. And I say, I don't talk as if I know what it's like to go through that. However, I do feel that there is definitely a lot of overlap between the issues faced by the integration of both the Muslim youth and converts, definitely when it comes to many masajid in the West, right? So, I've seen, these youth programs that were organized by, young Muslim adults in their 20s and 30s, like a youth center, which is try to get the Muslim youth more involved in the masjid. A lot of these programs are designed for the youth. And, unfortunately, you saw like the old guard kind of tear these programs down because, to them was creating this kind of fitna. But, that's, I see, I guess kind of depends which mosque you're at, but a lot of these masajid, they kind of don't really understand the issues faced by the youth or really understand where they're coming from. And, that's really sad to see. And I want to see more masajid, like involving the youth when it comes to, decision making, what they want for youth programs. Give them the reins and ask them exactly what they want. I mean, they are immersed in like, public schools and Catholic schools, so they understand, the range of opinions on Islam within the Anglosphere. And I think, they have kind of like their finger on the pulse more so than, like the imams who don't really interact with the, with the non-Muslim populations that much, right? Yeah, so, and also I see that, like I think that this model that we're approaching, that we're, advocating for at Islam for Europeans, would be very successful, at the grade school, high school, and university levels. The thing is that there's a lot of legality issues in terms of actually advising converts who are under the age of 18. So that's very tricky, especially for many masajid, because we can't really technically give advice to these kids, right? But a lot of these Muslim youth are heavily involved with these friends who have, who are looking towards Islam or converting to Islam. And that's tricky to navigate as well. And, a lot of youth, they come to say, how do we help out these converts? Like, what's the best advice we can give them? And really, I think that the whole thing that we're advocating for is that Islam is for everybody. It is not just limited to one particular culture or cultures from Muslim countries. So that when people do convert to Islam, no matter what their background is, in addition to learning the religion properly and, getting closer to Allah and getting acclimated and, meeting the Muslim community, I think being able to keep everything that's good within their culture is vital. And the more you can get these converts to kind of form the same kind of sub community that Muslim youth have already formed at the high school and university level, I think would be a very positive thing. I think that it would show the non-Muslim populations that Islam is for everybody, that it is a purifier of all cultures throughout the world, right? And by doing this, it would completely flip the script on the image of Islam in the West. You wouldn't feel uncomfortable wearing your traditional dress for Friday prayer or Eid prayer anymore, because the converts would be doing the exact same thing. And a lot of these, like people in the right wing, white people in the right wing, they would see that, wow, Islam isn't for everybody, and they're afraid of their culture dying out. But if you handle it this way, that you foster this environment where we take care of these converts in terms of them keeping their culture or returning to their traditional cultures while getting rid of the bad things. I think that it would completely flip the script on how Europeans think about Islam in the West, right? Because right now, like I see that unfortunately you see some Euro converts going to either one of two extremes. And these are two extremes that we want, that's not for Europeans. We want these converts to avoid, no matter what background they're from. One is like the kind of the virtue signaling uh white convert who says that all white people are evil, that we all have white privilege, that we all should be ashamed of our privilege, that we're responsible for the destruction of the Muslim world, that Muslims are an oppressed class along with other intersectional minority identities. So you have one extreme of white converts who do this, when they do convert to try to I guess a lot could speculate on their motives, but I mean, they kind of do this to fit in, with the greater Muslim community. So they try to act even more extremely left wing to try to fit in, and that is going to alienate them even further from their family and from their community, and it's going to make it look like more that Islam is a foreign invader, which is not what we want. I do hear about Latino converts who are kind of do the same thing, from South America, from Central America, because they kind of a lot of Dawa efforts there also take this kind of extreme leftist approach, which kind of further alienates them, from their Latino culture, which is not what we want. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is that you see this kind of hyper masculine WN/Muslim hybrid where they kind of go overboard or really go overboard in criticizing Muslim cultures, Muslims for not being fully practicing, for being lazy, backward, involved in drugs. And to an extent, you did see a lot of white converts act this way, but not to the extent that they were nationalists, but because they're had this such zeal that they wanted to, just bash different Muslim cultures left, right, and center, because they were getting so much support from some Muslims who, really wanted to they wanted to reform in the Muslim community, but at the same time, it comes off as really callous, partly because they don't really understand, the things involved in that culture, right? So that's another extreme they want to try to avoid as well. I think that if we had an environment where it was normal, for white people to convert to Islam and kind of have this kind of European Muslim identity, that was within the greater Muslim Ummah, basically a sub community. You would see varying levels of religiosity, varying levels of morality, just like any other, Muslim subgroup. I think that right now what we're seeing is that most people who can convert to Islam, like have a high level of religiosity to begin with, because regular Westerners who may not be that strong or may not have the most family support, they're not going to convert to Islam publicly. So I think it's important that to keep that in mind, but yeah, like and keeping this all, like kind of like the bigger picture. We have the Pakistani sub community of Muslim youth. We have the Syrian Muslim community of Muslim youth, Muslim Somali community of Muslim youth. So yeah, many Muslims for many different backgrounds. And I think the Muslim youth are actually really good at this, that when they tell someone who does convert to Islam, they try to assimilate into a different culture by wearing different dress and stuff. And I think now the youth are trying to still, they're understanding, like, no, we don't want you to LARP as one of us, it's cool that you want to wear this stuff to try to fit in, but we don't want you to lose the things that make you, right? If that makes sense. Yeah. So, but yeah, that kind of brings you to another issue, and I think one is that being a young Muslim in the West in 2023, you have all these haram influences coming at you left, right, and center. like I said, I was a non-Muslim in my high school. My school is 95% white. So I don't purport to know what it's like being a visible minority Muslim living in 2023. But I do know that, like kids, they can be cruel at this age. You can get made fun of for your accent, for your hijab, but there's also a lot of pressure to fit in, with your non-Muslim classmates, by getting involved in haram activities. So I wish, back then that my fellow white people were actually Muslims, even some of them, so that they had a set of values that got them ready for the real world once they step into it, right? To become a man that can support a wife, that can support a family, that learns job skills to the best of his ability, and gain the confidence, necessary to get that good career, right? If you're a woman, to learn to be, a good mother, a supportive wife, or if you choose to go into a career, that's absolutely vital in the Muslim community, and so on and so forth. I mean, growing up in a white Canadian Catholic high school, among teenage boys, there was the sentiment that a woman's job is inferior, as a wife, and as something to be looked down upon. There were taunts of physical and sexual jokes and denigration of women that was just so common. And it just really irked me that we were so disrespectful, to women, and vice versa. You kind of saw like these gender wars going on at like a much lower level than you do now. And just tell, that just sort of inculcated this really kind of hyper liberal lifestyle, even in the 90s, right? And it just led to, like, the destruction of the family. But now you fast forward to the 2020s, I can't imagine how difficult it is, for youth, let alone Muslim youth, living in this environment. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all the Shabab and help them get through this, this difficult time. And then on top of that, it has to be difficult. On top of that, the Muslim youth are caught between that and, having to conform to the traditional culture from their families from back home, a culture that they may or may not identify with, whether that's Palestinian culture or Somali culture, or maybe they're pressured to reject their cultural identity, that they see that their parents don't understand where they're coming from. So, I mean, that's, has to be tricky as well. But I think, so, our recommendations is that, don't reject who you are. I mean, you shouldn't feel bad about being a Muslim. You shouldn't feel bad about, coming from a particular cultural background. And I think now, that there's so much positivity about, there's still, a lot of anger towards Islam and Muslims in the West, but there's also a lot of people who feel positively about it or neutral about it. And you just have to gain allies where you can. Um, Now, I do admit that there are some Muslim youth that see, white people, the Anglosphere, as adversaries, as enemies, and they can't really trust white people at all because of the bad experiences that they had, or the bad experiences that their mother had or father had with some of them, right? And it really sucks, because there are some white people out there who have this anger towards Muslims and Islam, and it's reprehensible. I don't condone it. And it's understandable why some Muslim youth would feel this kind of resentment, fear, anger, inferiority towards the Anglosphere, right? So I'm saying this to reach out to those youth as well, you know, not the virtue signal, say that, all whites are irredeemably evil and collectively responsible for the destruction of the Muslim world. Indeed, when I was growing up as, a young white boy in Canada, most of us from our group were completely against the American and British invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. We never wanted these horrible invasions of the Muslim world. And even a healthy minority or even a slight majority supported the Palestinian cause. We just have to keep in mind, though, that it's the media that push this propaganda on top of us, that showed us movies like Executive Decision and True Lies, that painted Muslims in such a negative light. And a lot of us bought into it. But after the work from like we Muslims in Canada that like were honest, hardworking, like generous. They really had I think I really had a positive effect on people in the Anglosphere because they saw that Muslims are very stand-up people, right? I think it's difficult for them to convert to Islam because of there's so many barriers, cultural barriers to that. So inshallah, I mean, hopefully, the Muslim youth, they understand what these barriers are and how to alleviate them. So yeah. So I guess, in just to conclude, because we touched on a lot of subjects here. Like I think in general, do have a lot of Muslim youth that have friends who are interested in converting to Islam. They may even help them take their Shahada. They're going to experience a lot of fallout from their families and their friends. The thought that one is rejecting their culture, that's going to be a very difficult thing to navigate, and it can be very difficult for born Muslims to understand that struggle. Just it is difficult, also difficult for us converts to understand what it's like being a visible minority Muslim. I think if we do come together, if we do collaborate, if we do, have more of these dialogues, and I'm open to dialogue with Muslim youth who want to talk about this stuff. Even like I said, even if you have a lot of uh, negative sentiment towards the Anglosphere, which is, like I said, is understandable. I do want to have those conversations because, like I said, the Muslim youth, they're going to be the future, and I want to help build that future so that, or help give the Muslim youth the tools so they can help build that future so they become leaders for the community, right? So yeah, and yeah, so in conclusion, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep all the youth, the Muslim youth, protected from evil. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make them, great leaders, for the Muslim community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, protect our sisters, for wearing the hijab, and reward them. And even those who don't wear the hijab, like it's got to be a struggle, being a Muslim, growing up in grade school, high school, university level. Don't give up hope because there are a lot of like I said, a lot of people, a lot of young non-Muslim kids who do see a lot of positives in Islam, and even if they don't want to convert, at the very most, if they say, what, we don't care either way, or we have a positive image of it, we won't convert ourselves. Those are some people that you can come to an agreement with and ally with, so that we don't lose the pure nature and the youthfulness, and you can have that we can have in the future, inshallah, a world where you know we can protect their kids from the things that are being pushed against them in 2023. Okay, so that's my time for the day. Let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe to Islam for Europeans. Try to share this with as much of the Shabab as possible. But yeah, I'm so glad that I was able to talk about this population that I have a lot of bonds with. I have a lot of good Muslim friends that were young when I first converted, all the way up until today, and I really feel for them, and I wish the absolute best for them. So yeah, that's all my time for the day. Please like and subscribe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.